I can still hear the chains clatter when I close my eyes, the sound of iron links grinding against swollen flesh. They had shackled me to my brother, wrist to wrist, ankle to ankle, so close that I could feel the warmth of his breath when he whispered my name in the dark hold. We were children of the same mother, torn from the same village, yet treated as cattle to be weighed, priced, and ferried across a sea that smelled of rot and salt. The ship rocked, and every sway carried with it the groan of planks and the moan of souls, stacked like firewood. One morning, when the fever spread through the hold and the crew feared sickness more than mercy, they unlatched the locks from his wrist, but not from mine. I remember the sun burning white above as they dragged him out, his ribs sharp as cane stalks. Then, with no word, no prayer, no final glance allowed, they threw him into the water. I was left shackled to emptiness, my arms still tingling with the ghost of his touch. My name is not one the world remembers, but I was born on the western coast of Africa in the year of our Lord 1808, and my blood has carried me through storms that no man should ever endure. I was taken from the soil where my mother planted millet, dragged from the rivers where my father cast his net. From there, I was bound in iron, carried across the Atlantic, and forced to labor on the rice fields of South Carolina, where the mud clung to my skin like a second set of shackles. If you're hearing this, I need you to listen to the end. My voice is all I have left of those who walked beside me, who sang beside me, who were swallowed by waters or sold away under a gavel's strike. I do not tell these things for pity, but because silence is the slaveholder's friend. Silence lets the chains clatter on long after the wrists have turned to dust. If this reaches you, speak on it, so the silence doesn't bury us again. Let my words not vanish like smoke in the cane fields. Carry them. Share them. For each voice that rises, another chain is broken. The horn blew before the sun rose, a long, mournful call that dragged us from sleep, no matter how heavy the body or how swollen the feet. I would open my eyes in the dimness of the quarters, where smoke from the night's fire still hung in the air and the straw beneath us scratched at my skin. My hands were already aching before they touched the hoe, for every day was the same, and every night too short to heal what had been broken during the day. We tied rags around our waists, bare, feet pressed into the damp earth, and filed out into the fields before the morning light had spread across the Carolina sky. The soil smelled of salt and marsh, thick with mosquitoes, and when the tide rose, the mud sucked at our legs as if trying to swallow us whole. The overseer rode along the ridges on horseback, whip hanging from his hand like a reminder of time itself. He barked the pace and demanded that the rows be straight. The tools were heavy with rust, handles splintered from years of hands wearing them down. We were given rations of cornmeal and pork, sometimes beans if the season was kind, though never enough to fill a belly that worked from dawn to dark. Our clothes were coarse sackcloth, patched and threadbare, and when winter winds cut through, the fabric offered little protection. I remember children with runny noses, toes cracked open in the frost, yet still pushed into the furrows because every hand, no matter how small, was counted for profit. On Sundays, if no sale or inspection was planned, they allowed us to rest, though rest was only a word. Some gathered in secret, whispering prayers in the woods where no overseer could hear, singing soft songs that carried the weight of both sorrow and hope. We called them hush arbors. A fire smothered under dirt, voices muffled beneath the trees. Yet the spirit felt stronger there than in any white man's chapel. Old women sang lullabies in tongues nearly forgotten, rocking babies who were born into bondage by the cruel law that said the child must follow the mother's condition. Partus sequitur ventrum. The words were not ours, but their meaning was a brand seared into us. No matter the father, no matter the promise, the child was slave as the mother was slave. I had stood at auctions before, waiting to see who among us would be led away. The sound of the gavel striking wood is something that never leaves a man. Families clung to one another, knuckles white, hearts pounding in silence because crying out only made the bidding harsher. I had seen children screaming for mothers pulled from their arms, men forced to watch their wives bought like horses. Sometimes they brought a bucket of water to wash our skin, rubbing fat over our shoulders, so we would glisten in the light, so that the buyers could see the muscle and strength they paid for. And yet inside, many of us were hollowed by grief, broken before we even touched the fields. Still, even in such a life, we carved out pieces of love. At night, after the horn had gone quiet and the quarters grew still, we whispered stories of Africa, of kings and villages, of rivers that ran free. Children lay their heads on their mothers' laps, listening to words half remembered, half invented, keeping alive the memory of what had been stolen. Some of us carved little figures from wood or braided hair in patterns that told of where our people had come from, as if to stitch back together what had been torn apart. We laughed quietly when we could. Sometimes at the smallest things, a joke whispered while bending in the fields, or the way a baby's first steps set the women clapping despite their exhaustion. But the fear never left. It was stitched into our bones. Every knock at the quarter door at night might mean someone was being dragged away. Every stranger's arrival could mean another auction. The whip cracked not only in the fields but inside our heads, a constant threat that bent our backs before the overseer even lifted his arm. We lived under the shadow of laws and codes that defined us not as people, but as property, like oxen or tools. And though we built small shelters of family, song, and prayer against that storm, we always knew how fragile it all was. One sail, one sickness, one voyage of a ship across the ocean could tear it away in an instant. That was the world before the sea claimed my brother. That was the rhythm of bondage before the tide of fate carried me to the moment I can never forget. They came before the rains, the season when the ground was hard and the air carried the smell of dust. I was helping my father mend the net near the river, while my younger brother gathered sticks for the fire. The sound came like thunder at first, drums and feet pounding, but it was not our drums, not our people. Men with guns, faces marked in strange colours, stormed into our village. The air filled with screaming, with smoke, with the tearing sound of huts collapsing. I remember clutching my brother's arm, but the butt of a rifle struck my skull and everything went red. When I opened my eyes, my wrists burned. Rope cut into them so deep I thought bone would split. My brother was beside me, eyes wide, his face streaked with ash. We were driven with others, tied neck to neck, like cattle in a line that stretched farther than I could see. Behind us, the smoke of our village still rose, carrying the voices of those who did not survive. We walked for days, feet blistered, lips cracked, flies buzzing around sores that would not heal. Some fell, too weak to rise. When they could not be forced up with the lash, they were left where they lay. My brother clung to me, whispering songs our mother sang, as if words alone could carry us forward. When we reached the coast, the smell of salt filled the air, but with it came another stench: sweat, filth, sickness, and fear. We were herded into a barracoon, walls high and gates iron-bound. I saw hundreds crammed into pens like goats, men and women stripped of their dignity, waiting for ships that would tear them from this earth as surely as death itself. The traders examined us. They opened mouths, pinched arms, pressed hands against ribs to feel for strength. Some among us had been here for weeks, bones jutting, eyes glazed, their skin broken with sores from chains. At night, I lay with my brother's head against my chest, listening to the sobs that rose from every corner of that pen. Some prayed in tongues I did not know. Others sat silent, their eyes turned to nothing, already gone within themselves. Day came when they marched us down to the beach. The sea stretched wide and endless, its surface flashing like the blade of a knife in the sun. The ship loomed above us, its masts tall, its sails folded like the wings of some monstrous bird. The stench that poured from its hold was worse than anything I had known, a sickness that clung to the back of the throat and made men gag. They packed us into the darkness below, the chains fastened 2 by 2, so that I was shackled beside my brother. The ceiling was low, the air thick with heat and rot, the boards slimy with filth. We lay pressed against one another, unable to stretch our limbs, and when the ship began to move, the hold heaved like a belly turning sour. Days blurred into nights. There was no light except when they opened the hatch to throw down meager scraps of food or buckets of water thick with slime. The cries of the sick filled the darkness. The lash cracked if anyone resisted, and the chains rattled each time the ship rolled. The crew forced us on deck some days, making us dance with shackles cutting into our ankles, claiming it would keep our bodies alive for sail. The sun scorched our backs, and salt stung the sores that spread from wrists and ankles. At night, the sea sang a cruel song, waves slapping against the hull while the stars above looked down indifferent. Sickness spread, fever burned through the hold, leaving bodies trembling and slick with sweat. My brother grew weaker, his cough rattling, his voice fading. I pressed my lips to his ear, begging him to hold on, but the crew grew restless. One morning, when the fever took too many, they dragged the weakest out. Shackles were undone from one wrist but not the other, so when they pulled my brother, I felt the tug as though they meant to take my arm as well. He looked back at me, eyes wide, but there was no time for words. The sea swallowed him before I could scream. The splash was lost among the cries of others cast overboard. The iron still circled my wrist, heavy with the ghost of his touch. That moment never left me. When we reached the Americas, the air smelled different. Sweet, thick and heavy with the scent of cane fields and rot. They drove us into an auction yard in Charleston, where men with purses and fine coats circled like vultures. We were stripped, greased with palm oil to make our skin shine, and placed on blocks for inspection. Buyers pried at teeth, poked at muscles, asked our ages as though they were bargaining over livestock. Families were torn apart in that yard. A woman beside me screamed as her child was taken one way and she another. The gavel fell again and again, each strike a wound that split the world anew. I was sold to a rice plantation. The low country was a swamp, fields carved with dikes and canals that drowned us in mosquitoes and mud. From sunrise to sunset, we planted, weeded, harvested, our legs sinking into the muck while leeches clung to our skin. The overseer's whip cracked like thunder, and men collapsed under its sting. Rations of cornmeal and salt pork kept us alive, but never full. Clothes rotted from our bodies in the damp, and sores never healed in the marsh. Still, we found ways to endure. At night, in the quarters, we sang low, songs carried from Africa, blended with new words of sorrow and hope. The law said we were property, not people. Children born among us were counted as slaves from their first breath. The curse of partus, sequitur ventrum sealing their fate before they could walk. Yet in the shadows, we built families. We called each other brother, sister, uncle. Though blood might not bind us, kinship was the only shield we could raise against the lash. I saw punishments meant to break the soul. A man caught with a page of scripture hidden in his clothes was whipped until his back looked like broken earth. A woman who ran was branded, with hot iron on her shoulder, the letter seared into her flesh. Yet still, we resisted. We slowed our pace in the fields. We broke tools by accident. We hid away small scraps of food. Some learned letters in secret, tracing them in dirt, by firelight, passing knowledge like contraband. I too found a way to read, taught by a boy who had once served as a house slave and stolen scraps of his master's lessons. The words opened a door in my mind, though it was one I could never show in daylight. The songs carried us. We sang of freedom, of rivers, of Jordan, though we knew not where such a place lay. We prayed in hush arbors, hidden deep in the woods, calling out to a God who wept with us even if he did not deliver us. Some spoke of Haiti, where men had risen and cast off chains, and the idea of such a world lit fires in our chests. We whispered of escape, of following rivers north, of the Underground Railroad, though most who tried never returned. One night, after years of toil, I tried. The moon was high, and the tide low enough to cross the marsh. My feet bled as I ran, every snapping twig a thunderclap in my ears. Dogs barked, men shouted, the chase thundering behind me. I made it miles into the swamp, the reeds cutting my legs, the mosquitoes thick as smoke. But they caught me. The lash stripped flesh from my back. An iron was clasped around my neck, a collar with spikes to keep me from lying down. They paraded me before the others as a warning. Yet though my body broke, something inside me refused to die. Years passed. The world shifted. I heard whispers of war, of men in blue uniforms promising freedom for those who fled plantations to fight. Some among us left in the night, following the rivers north to Union lines. I remained, too weak to risk another attempt, but hope kindled each time news drifted through the quarters. When freedom finally came, it was not with horns or drums, but with a slow unraveling of chains, one link at a time. Papers read aloud, by men who once owned us, declared us free, though hunger and labour did not vanish with those words. Still, I stood beneath the sky, no master's whip at my back, and I thought of my brother, lost to the sea, and of all who did not live to see that day. I was shackled beside my brother, and they threw him overboard. That memory is my chain still, though no iron binds me now. It is the story I must tell, so that his name and mine, though forgotten in records, are carried in the breath of those who listen. The day that cleaves my life in two came without warning, though in truth every day of bondage carried the chance of such a wound. The sun burned hotter than usual, the air so thick that sweat clung to us before we stepped into the fields. We bent low over the rice, our backs aching, mud swallowing our ankles. The overseer's horse shifted restlessly on the dike, his whip coiled in his hand. Nothing seemed different until a cry rose at the far end of the row, a child's cry, shrill and panicked. I looked up and saw a mother clutching her little boy, no more than 4 years old, her body shaking as 2 white men strode across the ridge. They were traders, new arrivals, their boots clean of mud. The master followed behind, his hat shading his eyes, his mouth twisted into the cold smile I had come to dread. The woman knew, as we all knew, what their presence meant. A sale was to be made. She dropped to her knees, arms wrapped around her child, begging in words broken by sobs. The overseer lashed her across the back, but she would not let go. Her screams filled the fields, cutting through the drone of cicadas, through the rustle of rice stalks, through the very air. The child was torn from her arms. I can still see his tiny fists striking against the trader's coat, his voice calling for his mother. She clawed at the earth, her nails ripping, her body convulsing as if she could bury herself and disappear. The rest of us stood frozen, who slipping from my hand, my brother's memory rising like a ghost in the midday sun. It was the same sound, the same helpless cry, the same tearing away that had haunted me since the sea swallowed him. I had a choice, to stay silent, as fear commanded, or to act, though I knew the cost would be the lash, perhaps death itself. My body moved before my mind. I stepped forward, my voice breaking from my chest, shouting words I cannot even remember, only the fury that carried them. My hand reached for the child, though he was already beyond my grasp. The overseer's whip came down with a crack that split the air, fire tearing across my back. I stumbled but did not fall. Others shifted too, men and women raising their voices, cries of protest swelling like a storm. For a brief moment, the field belonged to us. Our anger rose higher than the crack of the lash, higher than the shouts of the riders. But the storm broke. The butt of a rifle struck my shoulder, sending me to my knees. They bound my wrists, dragged me before the quarters, where every man, woman, and child was forced to watch. They tied me to the post, my shirt torn from my body, my skin bared to the sun. I heard the mother wailing as they led her child away, her voice hollow with grief. I heard the whispers of my kin, prayers carried in trembling voices, begging God to shield me. Then the whip fell, Each strike was a river of fire across my back, tearing flesh until I could feel the warm trickle of blood sliding down my sides. I bit into the rope that held me, my teeth cutting into my lip, salt and iron flooding my mouth. I thought of my brother, of his hand torn from mine, of the splash that ended his life. I thought of the boy, his eyes wide with terror, and I knew I could not let the world forget either of them. With each lash, I told myself I would endure, that pain would not silence me, that if nothing else remained, the memory would. They left me half dead, my body crumpled in the dirt, flies already, gathering at the wounds. I should have wished for death, yet I clung to life with the stubbornness of a weed in cracked soil. Women tended my wounds in secret, smearing them with herbs, singing low so the sound carried no farther than the quarters. Men pressed cool water to my lips, their hands steady despite the fear. Every kindness was a rebellion, every act of care a weapon against the master's design. That day marked the turning. The lash broke my flesh, but it did not bend my spirit. From then on, I carried a fire that no whip could extinguish. I learned letters with greater urgency, scratching words into the dirt at night, knowing that to name our pain was to give it life beyond the body. I whispered news of freedom when it came near, shared scraps of stories about Haiti, about the railroad, about men who wore blue coats and promised liberty. I still carry the scars on my back. They are ridges raised like hills, valleys carved by cruelty. But to me, they are not shame. They are a map of survival, a testament to the day I chose to raise my voice, though the price was blood. The memory of my brother, the image of that child torn from his mother's arms, the sound of chains and the crack of the whip, all of it forged something in me that no master could own. That day, I became more than what they tried to make of me. I became a witness, and once a man has seen, truly seen, he cannot unsee, he can only speak. I lived long enough to see papers read aloud that said we were free, though the fields did not empty, and hunger did not vanish with a stroke of ink. Freedom came as a strange, uneven thing. Some left the plantations with nothing but scars and hope. Others stayed, tethered by fear or by the weight of debts they had never chosen. I walked away with the shirt on my back and the song still in my mouth, carrying more memories than belongings. I carried the voices of those who never made it to that day. My brother swallowed by the sea, the child sold from his mother's arms, the men and women buried in shallow graves beside the dikes, their names never marked in stone. Each one lived, inside me, not as shadows, but as a kind of chorus, pressing me to remember, pressing me to speak. I was not given the gift of forgetting. My scars made sure of that. Even now, in the quiet, I hear the creak of wood on water, the rattle of chains, the cry of a whip cutting air. Yet I also hear the hush of secret prayers beneath trees, the rise of voices in hidden songs, the laughter that somehow found its way into the dark. We were called property, but we lived as people. We were beaten, but we held one another. We were silenced, but we whispered still. If there is any justice in my words being heard now, it is that the world must understand this. Truth, what was taken can never be restored, but what was endured must never be denied. My life has been nothing more than a thread woven from grief and stubborn breath. But that thread belongs to a tapestry larger than me, larger than any master, larger even than the ocean that claimed my brother. The last thing I will say is this: chains fall silent when they sink into the sea, but memory does not drown. It rises, it floats, it carries itself across generations until someone is willing to listen. I have given you the truth as I carried it, heavy on my shoulders all these years. I have spoken of the chains, the fields, the lash, the songs, the small mercies that kept us alive. I have told you of my brother, shackled beside me, taken by the sea before his life could begin. I have told you of the boy ripped from his mother, of the fire in my own blood when I could not remain silent. These memories are not just mine. They belong to all who endured, to all who vanished unnamed into the dark corners of history. If you have heard me, let it not pass like wind through the cane. Speak it, carry it, share it, so the world remembers that we were here, that we suffered, that we endured, and that some of us lived to tell it. Do not let the earth close over our voices. That's my story. If this reached you, tell me what you felt. Don't let silence bury us again.